The sun cracked open the horizon, spilling burnt orange light over the parched earth. Ramu stood at the edge of his family's land, toes buried in dust that once clung to his father's boots like a second skin. Now it lifted in the breeze like ash, light, lifeless, and forgotten. 10 years had passed since the rains left, 5 since his father did. The land hadn't bloomed since either. Most villagers had sold their plots or moved to city jobs. But Ramu remained. By choice or by stubbornness, no one could say. His neighbors called him foolish. Dreams don't grow in dead soil. They'd scoff from under shaded verandas, watching him dig trenches under the sun. But Ramu kept digging. Each strike of his hoe echoed the promise he'd made to his father's fading eyes. I'll bring life back to this land. Every morning he opened a weathered journal, the one his father had used to track harvests. Pages were filled with dates, sketches of crops, water levels, then a sudden blank space after the last good season. Ramu had filled that silence with his own drawings, irrigation plans, hopeful charts, scribbled prayers. On the final page, in bold ink, he had written only 4 words, "The farmer's dream lives." His mother urged him to sell. "What is a man without harvest, Ramu?" she'd whisper, not unkindly, just tired. He never answered. Instead, he planted. 1 seed each day. Not enough to feed anyone, just enough to believe. That morning, he cradled a single grain of pearl millet between calloused fingers, pressed it gently into a hand-dug furrow, and covered it with dry earth. He didn't water it. There was no water, only sky. And hope. Around him, silence. No birds, no rustling leaves. Only the breath of wind slipping between brittle stalks from years past. Even the crows had abandoned the field. But Ramu stood tall. Sweat drew maps across his spine, and dirt clung to his arms like armor. He wasn't waiting for miracles. Just time. Just one sign that this land still remembered how to live. That afternoon, clouds gathered faintly on the horizon, like ghosts too afraid to enter. Ramu didn't look up. He walked back to his hut, slow and heavy, a farmer without a harvest, but not without a dream. Behind him, the planted furrow caught a glint of fading light, casting a faint shadow over the soil. It was nothing, and it was everything. The days stretched into weeks, and the sky offered only silence. Ramu's footprints deepened in the dust, tracing paths from well to furrow, from hope to resignation and back again. The single seed he planted had yet to sprout. Still, each morning, he knelt beside it, brushed away the dust like it was sacred. The village watched with quiet derision. Children mimicked his digging in the date, while elders shook their heads and spoke of better uses for stubborn youth. "The city feeds its dreamers," one of them muttered. "The land only buries them." But Ramu didn't flinch. He worked with a rhythm that defied logic. Dig, waterless pour, mark. He carved trenches by hand, piled stones to guide invisible rain, and crushed dried leaves into mulch, hoping to trap moisture that no longer came. His hands blistered, then hardened. His silence grew thicker. Inside his home, the shelves stood mostly empty. A few onions, a sack of salt, a faded photograph of his parents. His father midlife, son at his back, palms full of grain. Ramu stared at it often, not for nostalgia, but for instruction. That image reminded him what the land used to give, and what it might give again. One morning, his mother placed a bundle of cloth beside his cot. Inside, her gold bangles. "Sell them. Pay your debts. Start over. Ramu," she said, voice trembling. He looked at her, eyes hollow but firm. "If I leave now, the land will forget me." She didn't argue. She just left the room, wiping her hands on her saree like trying to scrub away helplessness. The debt collector came that week, leather ledger in hand, sharp eyes scanning the barren plot. "This field's a graveyard, boy. Sell now. The bank won't wait." Ramu offered nothing but silence. That night, he sat beneath a neem tree, the dry wind sighing through its brittle leaves. In his lap lay the journal. His father's ink faded, his own notes cramped between margins. And then a whisper of movement, not from the sky, but the soil. A tiny green shoot had broken the surface of the furrow. Fragile, unsure, but alive. He didn't cheer. He didn't call out. He simply touched it, fingers trembling. One sprout among hundreds of failed seeds. It was almost nothing, but not quite. That night, sleep came without struggle. He dreamed not of rain, but of rows of green, endless and swaying, the wind warm with harvest. Morning arrived without miracle, but Ramu rose with new weight in his chest, not dread, but something steadier, like the first stone of a foundation. The sky was still empty, but the earth had spoken. Rain came without warning. Not a storm, not a flood, just a quiet, steady patter that began before dawn and lingered until the ground stopped resisting. Ramu stood at the threshold of his hut, motionless, eyes wide, watching the droplets soak into the dust like ink into paper. No thunder, no wind, just water, as if the sky had finally remembered its promise. By midday, the field shimmered. Tiny green heads poked out from the furrows, stretching like children waking from a long sleep. Ramu walked among them, barefoot, letting the mud clutch his feet. For the first time in years, the land was soft again. The villagers noticed. First it was Shuman, the old widow from across the road. She sent her grandson with a small tin of compost, no words attached. Then came Deepak, a former skeptic, now lingering near the fence with veiled curiosity. A murmur had begun to ripple through the village. Not loud, not yet belief, but curiosity was a beginning. Ramu said little. He worked harder. With the rains, he began implementing what he had studied in stolen hours under dim lanterns, mulching, crop rotation, and drip irrigation using clay pots buried at the roots. It was slow, tedious work, but the soil responded. At night, he returned to the journal. He filled its pages with diagrams, notes, even poems, quiet celebrations written to no one. Today, the cucumber vine found the trellis. It climbed like it knew where to go. Oh, a bee visited today. Maybe she'll come back with friends. There were still losses. A row of tomatoes drowned in an unexpected downpour. One of his makeshift water tanks cracked. But these failures felt different now. Not final, just part of the learning. His mother began cooking full meals again. Not feasts, but food that came with aroma. She hummed while grinding spices. She even planted tulsi by the window, whispering that the house needed protection again, like life had returned. One afternoon, Ramu caught sight of a child peering over the stone wall. Instead of shooing her away, he waved her in. Together, they watered young banana plants with tin cups. She giggled every time the leaves twitched at the touch. For the first time, Ramu smiled. Not the tight-lipped endurance he wore like armor, but something softer, looser. The kind of smile that had space for joy. The field was far from complete. Weeds still crept in. Pests circled the periphery. But something unshakable had shifted. Not just in the soil, but in Ramu himself. He no longer waited on the sky. He worked with it. And one morning, as he scribbled into the journal, a simple truth rose within him like sun through mist. The dream wasn't to grow a field. It was to become the kind of man who could. By the end of the season, Ramu's field shimmered with color, amber grains, lush green creepers, bursts of yellow marigold marking the borders. The wind no longer scraped across barren land, but carried the scent of ripening crops, damp soil, and the promise of plenty. Ramu walked the rows at sunrise, basket in hand, brushing his fingers across the wheat heads as though greeting old friends. Each stalk stood tall, not just with grain, but with a quiet testimony of struggle, a belief held when no one else could see it. Villagers no longer watched from afar. They came now with notebooks and questions. What seed did you use? How did you trap water? Can you show me the composting pit? Ramu didn't hoard knowledge. He walked with them, explained, demonstrated. The same hands that had once worked in solitude now guided others. Even the school teacher visited with his students, pointing at the irrigation lines and the shade crops. This, he said, is science and patience. This is the future. A small training shed rose on the edge of the field, built from leftover wood and community donations. Ramu filled it with tools, seed samples, and a blackboard. He called it the farmer's corner, though it felt more like a temple, one where sweat, soil, and shared learning were worshipped daily. His mother stood at the threshold one evening, holding a clay bowl of steaming lentils and flatbread. You should eat before the others come, she said, eyes soft, proud. You'll need your strength. These days, You're everyone's teacher." Ramu chuckled, shaking his head. "I'm still learning." After dinner, he returned to his journal, its pages now worn, thick with notes, soil smudges, and seeds tucked between lines. He turned to the final page and slid in a photograph, the field in full bloom, sun setting behind it. Beside it, he wrote, "To my father, your roots still hold this land." He closed the journal and placed it on a handmade shelf in the shed. That night, as he stood under silver sky, he heard music from the village. Drums, laughter, harvest songs echoing through the air. A celebration had begun. Not for him, not even for the crops, but for something deeper, the return of faith. Ramu didn't join the dance. He watched from the edge of the field, where the last row of wheat swayed like dancers themselves. The wind tugged gently at his shirt, like a nudge from the past, or a quiet blessing. He smiled, not for the harvest alone, but for the journey, the furrows of failure, the roots of resilience, and the seed of a dream planted long ago. The soil had kept its promise, and so had he.